What happens when silence speaks louder than words, and then, with just 14 words, everything shifts? That's exactly what happened when Johnny Depp made his silent stand at Charlie Kirk's memorial. It wasn't just a moment of grief, or of reflection. It was a moment that shook people to their core. A moment where the world was reminded that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't shouted, or explained, or even defended. Sometimes, it's spoken through complete silence. And then, when the time is right, a handful of carefully chosen words can change the entire conversation. Now, let's be honest. We live in a time where everyone feels the need to explain themselves. To defend themselves online. To tweet, to post, to clap back instantly whenever criticism comes flying. But Johnny, he didn't do that. He didn't meet backlash with noise. Instead, he chose stillness. And in that stillness, in that quiet, he created space. And in that space, people couldn't help but fill it with their own questions, their own doubts, their own judgments. And that's exactly what made his eventual words land with such force. So let me paint the scene for you. The room was heavy, quiet but restless, filled with whispers. Cameras flashed, eyes followed his every move. People were waiting for something dramatic, some big statement, maybe even a breakdown. But instead, Johnny just stood there. Silent. Steady. No gestures. No rushed defense. No anger. Just presence. And that presence felt louder than any speech could have been. But of course, silence rarely goes unchallenged. As he stood there, people began to whisper louder. The critics were quick to jump in. Why isn't he speaking? Why isn't he defending himself? Does silence mean guilt? These were the kinds of questions flying around. In a culture where fast responses equal strength, Johnny's silence was almost confusing. And yet, that was the brilliance of it. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He was waiting. Timing, after all, is everything. Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever had that moment where you chose not to answer right away? Maybe someone criticized you unfairly, maybe someone tried to provoke you. And instead of reacting, you just stayed calm, collected. And that silence, oh, it drove them crazy, didn't it? Because silence forces the other side to keep talking, to keep digging, to reveal themselves. And that's exactly what happened here. The backlash got louder, harsher, more desperate. But Johnny? He just let it happen. Like a storm passing over, he stayed rooted. And then, when the moment was right, he finally spoke. 14 words. That's all it took. Not a rant. Not a long explanation. Just 14 simple words. I'd rather stand silent in truth than speak loudly in a lie. That's it. And with those words, the room shifted. The critics suddenly looked small, almost embarrassed. The silence, the waiting, the calm, all of it led to that single sentence. And it worked. It didn't just end the backlash. It shattered it. Because those words exposed what the noise really was, a distraction. The truth didn't need defending with paragraphs or debates. The truth only needed patience, timing, and calm delivery. Now here's the fascinating part, psychologists say silence has an incredible effect on people. When someone stays quiet, especially under pressure, others can't help but project their own fears, doubts, and assumptions into that space. That's exactly what happened. The critics filled the silence with their own noise. And Johnny simply let them. He didn't need to fight. He let them reveal themselves. And then, when he spoke, the contrast was so sharp, so simple, that his words cut straight through. This isn't new, by the way. History is full of moments where silence changed everything. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., who often paused in his speeches to let the weight of his words settle in the air. Think of political leaders, teachers, even parents. You probably know this feeling too. Imagine a teacher who falls silent in the middle of class. Suddenly, every student pays attention. Or think of a parent who stops arguing and just looks at you quietly. That silence can be louder than shouting. It unsettles. It shifts power. Johnny tapped into that same psychological truth. But here's something even more practical. Silence doesn't just disarm critics, it disarms expectations. People were expecting him to lash out, to defend, to explain. But he didn't give them that. And in not giving them what they expected, he took back control. That's why his silence felt like strength instead of weakness. And that's why his 14 words hit so hard. Short. Direct. Honest. And impossible to twist. There's a reason short phrases stay with us. Think about some of the most memorable lines in history. I have a dream. Just do it. Love wins. They're all short. They're all sharp. And they're all unforgettable. Johnny's 14 words followed that same pattern. They were simple enough to be remembered, powerful enough to be repeated, and honest enough to be believed. So what can we learn from this? Well, here are a few takeaways that go beyond this one moment. First, silence is not weakness. It can be one of the strongest responses when the world expects you to fight. Second, short words beat long speeches. The longer you talk, the easier it is for people to twist or ignore what you're saying. But a single, sharp line? That sticks. And third, timing matters. Saying the right thing at the wrong time can fall flat. But waiting, holding back until the moment is right, that's what makes words unforgettable. Now, let's expand on this, because this lesson isn't just for Johnny Depp at a memorial. It's something you can carry into everyday life. Imagine being at work, and someone unfairly criticizes you in a meeting. Most people would rush to defend themselves. But what if you just paused? Let the silence linger. Let the weight of their words hang in the air. People will start to wonder. And then, when you finally respond, calmly and simply, your words will carry far more weight than if you jumped in defensively. That's what Johnny did. And that's why it worked. Or think about personal relationships. We've all had arguments with loved ones. Sometimes those arguments get loud, messy, emotional. But what happens when one person just stops? Not out of avoidance, but out of calm. They let the other person talk, rant, repeat. And then, when emotions peak, they respond with one simple sentence that cuts through the noise. That's the power of silence plus timing. It's not about ignoring. It's about listening, holding space, and waiting for the right words. And let's not forget, the world we live in now almost fears silence. Social media is constant noise. Everyone is expected to react instantly. To comment, to post, to share an opinion right away. Silence feels uncomfortable. But Johnny showed that silence can actually be the boldest response of all. Because when everyone else is shouting, silence makes people lean in closer. They want to know what you're thinking. They want to hear what's coming. And when you finally do speak, they're listening with full attention. That's priceless. Now, some people might wonder, doesn't silence make you look guilty? Isn't speaking up always better? Well, not always. Here's the myth, that silence equals surrender. But in reality, silence often equals control. Guilty people usually scramble to defend themselves. Innocent people can afford to wait. That's why Johnny's stand worked. He didn't scramble. He didn't panic. He let the storm pass. And when the dust settled, all it took was 14 words to clear the air. And let's talk about those words again, because they deserve a second look. Asterisk, I'd rather stand silent in truth than speak loudly in a lie. Asterisk, notice the balance in that sentence. Silent versus loud. Truth versus lie. It's simple, almost poetic. That balance is part of why it feels so strong. It's not complicated. It's not technical. It's just a clear choice between two opposites. And in choosing silence with truth, Johnny positioned himself not just as someone avoiding drama, but as someone above it. Someone unwilling to fight with noise. That's something we can all carry with us. How many times do we get caught up in noise? Online arguments, gossip, petty debates. And how often do those actually solve anything? Almost never. But silence, and one calm, sharp line, that can change everything. That can reset the tone of an entire room. That can shift the balance of power. That can protect your peace. And that's exactly what Johnny showed us in that moment. So, let's circle back. Imagine the scene one more time. A memorial. Heavy emotions. Whispers, criticism, waiting. A man standing still, silent, letting the noise grow around him. And then, with 14 words, the noise collapses. That's not just a Hollywood story. That's a human story. That's a reminder of the power we all hold when we choose not to meet chaos with chaos. When we choose stillness over shouting. When we choose truth over noise. And now, let me turn this to you. If you were in Johnny's shoes, facing backlash, standing in front of a crowd, would you stay silent, or would you speak up right away? Which do you think would feel more powerful in your own life? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your answer in the comments. Because your perspective might inspire someone else watching right now. And hey, if you found this breakdown interesting, if you enjoyed unpacking not just what happened but why it mattered, then you're going to want to check out my next video. In that one, we'll dive into another powerful Hollywood moment that left millions speechless. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Before you go, don't forget, hit that like button if this story resonated with you, share it with a friend who needs to hear the reminder about silence and strength, and subscribe so you're here for the next one. Because together, we're building a space where stories aren't just told, they're understood. And remember this, sometimes the loudest voice in the room is silence.